Absolutely. So what this amendment does is it makes hold for further study no longer final action on a bill. We've had a lot of discussion. It's something that always comes up every legislative session, exactly what a motion to hold for further study means. And I'm often sitting in committee, and I'm a little bit conflicted because there's a bill that I think is a good bill, and I want to make sure that that bill doesn't die. I want to make sure that we have a chance to vote on that bill. But sometimes bills need amendments. Sometimes it's important that we can wait and we can think about the committee testimony and decide if changes are needed. It doesn't always make sense for us to vote at the first hearing. It makes sense for us to wait, consider testimony. And unfortunately, under the current rules, we often don't have that choice. Sometimes when we vote to hold a bill for further study, it's the last time we ever see a bill. So many great bills I've voted for, or voted to hold, because I thought maybe it would make sense to make a couple of changes. But then we never see them ever again. And what this would do would mean that when we vote to hold for further study, it's a real vote to hold for further study. We're holding it to study it further, but it doesn't take away a sponsor's right to bring a bill back ultimately for a vote if that sponsor so chooses, a voting committee. I think this strikes a good balance. It brings our rules more in line with the rules that we have, that other legislative chambers have. But again, the final thing I want to offer when thinking about this is something that chairs can implement without this change in the rule if they choose to do so, or actually committees can implement. At some point, if a committee wants to table a bill instead of holding it for further study, we might have the opportunity to offer that motion. I just want to remind everyone that that is an option that we do have in case we want to not vote on a bill right away, but preserve that final action. So I think that this is really important because we really do need final action on a bill. We need that right, and we need the ability to vote to hold a bill without thinking that this is the last time we're going to see it again, without giving up our ability to have an ultimate vote on what the final action on that bill is going to be.
Thank you, Mr. President. I strongly rise in support of this amendment for many reasons. Rule 610 means that a senator cannot ask for a discharge on their bill if it's been considered. And right now, held for further study is considered. So to me, that means that, you may have a good bill that you've been put in, 4 or 5 years. It doesn't really need to change. It's just a matter of having it come back up in committee for a vote. And I think something like that, a senator should be able to request a discharge. I also am in strong support of this because of something I've been seeing lately in a lot of the committees, and that's where we are being asked to hold all of the bills for further study before the testimony has been heard, the actual hearing of the bill has actually happened. And I've objected to this every time it's happened because I don't want to vote on a bill and make it considered before I've actually heard testimony. I would like to hear the testimony of the people who come out and, give their thoughts on the bill, whether it's good or bad. I would like to be able to see the notes maybe from the legal counsel before I vote on something. And the fact that we're doing that before we've even heard the first word of testimony, even from the sponsor, I can't go along with that, especially knowing that that's going to prevent a senator from taking any further action on their bill. So I hope that you will agree with this and strongly support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Bell, for submitting this. I think that the issue that Senator Mack's amendment and Senator Bell's amendment are trying to get at is the black box that is held for further study. And so, as you guys are probably starting to realize, I'm a big fan of making the implicit explicit. And it's the case that when you hold something for further study, you could be meaning a whole lot of stuff. It could mean this bill needs work. It could mean this isn't the right time, but it might be the right time in 2 weeks. It could mean the sponsor hasn't done what we liked yet, and so we're going to pressure them into doing something else. Now, that accusation, hard to prove, but we don't know. It could mean the committee doesn't want to be on record taking a position on this issue. And so I understand that what I'm asking us all to do is be accountable. Move away from a system that allows us to hide behind a procedural move that keeps us off the record on issues that are difficult to deal with. That's what this does. And it makes me uncomfortable. I've expressed that to some of the chairs. I've expressed that to some of the leadership. I don't understand what's happening all the time when we hold something for further study. And I think that's on purpose, right? It's on purpose that it's nebulous. It's on purpose that we don't have to be on record to the public taking a clear position on the legislation itself. We can sit there, not vote yes, not vote no, don't even have to speak sometimes because you just have to vote and say yay or nay, and the bill gets held forever. And so if it's not Bell's solution, if it's not Mac's solution to bring it to the floor and have a real vote, I encourage my colleagues, please, talk to me about how we get out of this situation where we hide behind procedure. That's not what I'm here for. Calle 13 ser, me puedes ver por dentro con solo mirarme de frente. I always present how I feel about stuff, what my opinions are, and I'm willing to be held accountable for it. That's why I stepped into this office. But it's often the case that this, like a lot of procedural moves, allows us to hide. And I think that's wrong. That's not what we're here for. So I support this amendment. If it's not what your cup of tea is, please, I look forward to talking about alternatives. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Costa. Senator Bell.
So I have an entirely different perspective on held for further study, and let me share it with you. Being in my 5th term up here, my 9th year, I think by this point I'm just learning how to be a senator, how to be effective at legislating. And I say that based upon the fact that there are so many moving parts to any piece of legislation up here that sometimes it's hard to see the big picture. So when bills come before the committee for the first time, my lens doesn't see when I hear my perspective isn't when I hear held for further study that bill's going to die. My perspective is, wow, I've got some work to do. What are the issues that I have to overcome? Why is that bill held? Is there a competing interest that I need to go meet with and have discussions with and try to assuage their anxieties and concerns and find some common ground? I don't see it as Big Brother telling me I'm not getting my legislation. I see it as a process in which I have to work in order to achieve a result that ultimately, very often, like the great book by Eric Redmond that I read in my undergrad in D.C. at American University 30-something years ago, The Dance of Legislation, very often isn't what it started as. It's entirely different. And in the end, maybe I'm not super happy about the bill, but I can live with it. I can live with the art of compromise. And sometimes the bill very often won't make it through that process. And that's because in the competing interests that we have as a society in representing all facets of our populace, irrespective of race, creed, religion, and representing those interests honestly and equitably, bills will fail. And that's okay, because if a bill fails, that means that there's another day. You come back. Sometimes they fail for very simple reasons, sometimes they fail for profound reasons. And I wasn't going to get up here, but when I hear all this, and respectfully, it's good that we have debate, but when I hear all this, I'm going to say drama about why hold for further study is such a bad thing, I'm lost. Because every year that I come up here, I work within that process to achieve results. And sometimes, you're really up against great odds. And there's a challenge to trying to overcome the differences and to meet that common ground. And it's not easy. And as I said, I started by saying 9 years, and I'm just becoming, I think, experienced enough to say I really understand what I'm doing. Because the first year, I didn't have a clue. And that's not meant as a slight at anybody other than myself. It took some years to start to understand it, Mr. President. So I'm okay with hold for further study, because bills don't die when they're held for further study. They're in a holding pattern. I want to say one more thing that really has bothered me in recent committee hearings, and I'm going to get this off my chest. In Judiciary and Environmental just recently, 2 committees I sit on, we held every bill for further study. A couple of bills I really liked, thought they were great, almost there. Even made some phone calls before the committee hearing with some of the leaders in those respective areas to get their thoughts and all. Suddenly we get these callers calling in about a minute and a half into the conversation. And you've held it for further study. If you don't vote for this bill, we know where you live. We're coming to your house. What? What kind of an outrageous, preposterous thing is that to say? That you're going to get up there and stick your finger in a member of the committee's eye because they don't vote for that bill as it is. So, I wanted to be diplomatic. I said, Madam Chair, you know, we hold bills for further study because they need to be worked out. And everything I just said to you, tried to condense it, right? Fell on deaf ears, person after person after person. So, leads me to wonder in the coming couple of months, are we going to see this over and over again, all these calls about, you know, you're holding bills for further study, therefore you're voting against it. What is that? It's not true. It's not accurate. And so I say that, again, that holding for further studies, not a bad thing. It's a process. You can work in it. You can get your bills. You know, rise above all this and try to work as a legislator. Become good at what you got elected to do up here. It's all this naysaying that drives me crazy sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I hadn't planned on getting up again, but I feel I need to. I feel like when I hear certain things being said here, outside of this chamber, I feel like I'm being gaslighted about what held for further study is. This amendment doesn't say we can't hold for further study. There's lots of things that I think should be held for further study. What it's saying is that it shouldn't be in the list of actions that are considered. That's it. So that a senator can do something on the bill. Held for further study is for when you need to potentially look at it, talk to people. But it's also something that is used to prevent a bill from certain legislators to go through. And if we say it's not, you're fooling yourself, because obviously there are good bills that are put in by everyone here. We're all trying to do the work of people of Rhode Island. But we know that certain bills are not going to go through. They're going to get held for further study, and then we'll never hear from them again. And if you say that that doesn't happen, I don't know what to say. But at least removing it as a considered bill will give the senator a chance to do something about it. And I think we all deserve that right, so thank you.
I think the intent of this legislation is to be admired, but I think how it would actually function in committee, especially under pandemic, has to be recognized. And one of the comments I wanted to comment on specifically is the idea of how and why we might hold a calendar of bills before we hear testimony. And I'll give some examples. I've not only seen it in health, I've seen it in environment, I've seen it as I've listened in or watched judiciary. When we have 100 people due to pandemic conditions calling in, sometimes more than 100. I think we had 120 people call in the other night in health. to my best recollection, before the pandemic conditions under which we held hearings, I never went through that procedure of holding the calendar as a motion before we heard testimony. But consider when we have 120 people signed up for a bill, and some of them are signed up for several bills. Technically and logistically, the chances of getting through that process with people calling in under the current conditions seems virtually impossible. If I was not to hold the calendar to start the meeting, I would have to go back sometimes 5 or 6 times to the same person and try to reconnect them with the call. Just logistically and technically would not work. I can tell you that me personally, and I know this to be true for other chairs, I hold the bill out of respect for that bill. If that bill needs to be fixed in order to be taken seriously by the House and by the governor so it doesn't get vetoed, I have work to do as a chair, and the sponsor of the bill has work to do as a sponsor of the bill. Therefore, I don't think this technically fixes either of those issues, and it could potentially, under the context, but maybe not the intent that it's brought up based on the comments, could be detrimental to how we move forward this session.
Yeah, I rise to support this piece of this amendment. I want to kind of respond to an important thing that is not being talked about. I heard from some constituents who had spent hours waiting, to testify, and felt like they had the wind knocked out of them, because they could not believe many people for the first time this year are ever testifying, because we found a creative way in this pandemic to make things accessible for them. But in that process, people were dismayed, surprised, shocked, bewildered, and insulted, because bills were held for further study before they ever got to testify. And they had never seen that happen before. And to my colleague, Chairman Miller, maybe that's because it didn't happen before. Again, I find this kind of convenient. And I do not think the fact that it's laborious to do so is a good excuse to do so. So if the process to allow people to be heard before we make an action on a bill, our obligation is to the people. And so making things easier for us is not a priority. It shouldn't factor. It's not a thing. The second thing is, my colleague before, Senator Archambault, did mention about people waving fingers in their faces. And, we actually are quite protected and are hearing testimony behind screens in the comfort of our own home. And I have never actually had anybody put their finger in my face. However, the reason why I'm actually in this chamber is because 2 years ago, I was so infuriated because I testified in front of the Judiciary Committee 2 years ago and had fingers waved in my face as a constituent about the power grab that was the Senate rules then. I had the nerve to speak up in Judiciary Committee and had the chair at the time and my colleague, Senator Archambault, get red in the face and wave their finger at me, and I thought, yeah, I think I'm going to run. So we can continue to dig our heels in and ignore the people and then fuel them to demand a government that listens to them and doesn't dismiss them, or we can keep doing this.
And I've listened very closely to the comments and suggestions from Senator from Smithfield and our Health and Human Services Chairman. And I think I want to return us to what this amendment actually does. This amendment would make held for further study work the way it's been described. It's not abolishing held for further study. It doesn't get rid of this motion. And the arguments presented for why we need this kind of option, those arguments make sense. Sometimes you do need an option to not vote on a bill the first hearing, so you have time to consider testimony. That makes sense. Nothing in this amendment would change that. What this amendment would do is, in fact, strengthen that argument. It would clarify that a vote to hold for further study is not a vote on a bill. It is not final action on that bill. And so we would be able to say with a clear conscience that when we vote to hold for further study, we're not voting on that bill. Right now, because it is final action, a vote to hold for further study kind of is a vote on a bill. This would clear that up. It would make the motion to hold for further study work the way we want it to work. And the final suggestion I have, I understand the difficulty that our HHS chairman brought up, that sometimes when you have a lot of people testifying, there can be times when you don't want to have to hold that motion at the end. And actually, I think in our rules, we're not compelled to hold a vote on every bill we hear. I think actually we have a procedural option, if we don't make this amendment. We do actually have a procedural option we can think about. Sometimes we think really strongly that we don't want to have a vote on a particular bill at the end. We just don't have to vote on it. We can just hold it and just have a hearing. So again, I want to return us to what this does. This really doesn't abolish hold for further study. Doesn't get rid of any of the reasons to have this motion. All it does is it makes it work as we want it to work, so that it is not a vote on a bill. So none of us will ever have to defend, why did you vote against this bill when all you did was just vote to hold it. So that's why I think this is a really good compromise. I think it strengthens the motion, it doesn't abolish it.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. Just a couple things with regards to the amendment we have before us. There are times when a motion to hold for further study is done because I've been at many hearings, others probably have as well, where you lose a quorum. Once you lose a quorum, you can't vote. You're not allowed to vote once that quorum ceases to exist, and we've seen that over the years. I've seen that in finance over times and other various committees that we've had extensive hearings on, because committee members need to come and go for a variety of reasons, and you potentially will lose that quorum. So that measure needs to be there. We do need to take an action on legislation when it's brought forward. And just about every bill. I might like to think all the bills I've ever submitted, including all this year, are perfect. They're not. None of them are. None of them ever are. And they do require work. So the ability and we do need to have committees take action on bills. The rules we have before us allow us to do that. I respectfully request my Senate colleagues to vote down this amendment. Thank you.
If all members have recorded their vote, the clerk will lock the machine. There are 6 votes in the affirmative, 31 in the negative, and the amendment fails.